there was a lot of people said they couldn't make it. So I had a lot of cancellations. I honestly thought that was 7. Barbara thought that was 6:30. Anyway, I did get something ready because we said with this year we would be doing something to do with VJ Day. So this is why I just came on, because I thought, well, I'll record it and put it on, because I didn't think anybody was there. But anyway, I did this for William Henry Frederick Little on the 8th of January, in the Roll of Honour. And I thought that would be interesting just to have something different, because he escaped Singapore and went to Sumatra, and he ended up as a POW, and he was part of the British Sumatra Battalion, which was formed 9th of the 5th, 42. And Dudley Abthorpe was the captain in charge. And of course, they weren't a fighting battalion. They were a prisoner of war battalion, if you like. They were mainly the 20 officers and 480 men who were escapees. They were supposed to be troublemakers, so they formed them in a battalion. So Dudley Abthorpe was supposed to keep them in control. They were eventually sent in the England Maru to Murgai. Is that right, Ray?
Yeah.
Murgai?
Yeah. Murgai in the south, yeah.
Murgai in Burma. My pronunciation, that's what I'm asking you. And they lost. The death rate there was, I'll find it in a minute, just a minute, 12. So they lost 12 there, and then they went to Tavoy, and then they ended up at the Burma end of the railway, where they worked through. And because we all know that the Burma end of the railway wasn't really named as places, that was named as kilometres from Tanbai Yuzat. Is that right, Ray?
I don't know. I can never pronounce it.
Tanbai Yuzat, that'll do. Anyway, that's where they started, and then they went through and they formed Kumis, working parties. And he was in the 51st Kumis. And then when the railway was finished, they decided to send the 51st to French Indochina, Saigon. And so they didn't go, they went from Nong Pradut to Bangkok. They didn't go back to Singapore, which I thought they did originally. They went across land to Saigon. I haven't got the route, but they say it was a long, tedious journey. Any ideas, Ray?
No.
No. Anyway, they ended up in the Mekong River, and they were barged across, and then they steamed into Saigon. Why I've said that is because the next bit ties in, because I was trying to find something for January that was different to what we've been doing. So January 1945, by this time, of course, they were at Saigon. So Saigon, this is what was in Can you see the book?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a very good book about the British Sumatra Battalion, and I'll read what he said for January. Of course, we said we'd do January, February, and so on. Tycho invited all officers to supper. This is the 1st of January. Tycho invited all officers to supper at Jap office hut. All ordered to dress Red Cross clothes, American uniform, food from Red Cross parcels. Photographs taken, Peter Kindi concert. The 2nd of January, Major Glossop and Lieutenant Templeman beaten up. That's brilliant. They've been invited on the 1st to a meal, and then on the 2nd they were beaten up. That's brilliant. On the 3rd, air raid alarm, 12:35 to 13:05 hours. Lieutenant Crom and Lynn Hurt questioned at Kempe headquarters. New British POWs ex-Singapore arrive from old hospital camp. Lieutenant Carter's and Under Officer Kaiser beaten up. Brilliant. Mangadol, Dutch POW, died in roll call parade this evening. He died actually on the parade. Air raid alarm, blah, blah, blah. Air raid, 2 bombs fell some distance from camp, 1 plane heard, cloudy day. On the 9th, air raid alarm, cloth and boot theft from dockyard. On the 10th, air raid alarm, 1 bomb, water shortage since the 8th. On the 11th, I think a Slitter, Dutchman, beaten up for making a trumpet for concert party. 8:45 to 13, this is on the 12th, 1845 to 1350 air raid. 145 dive bombers raid Saigon. 1510 to 2155 air raid, approximately 150 dive bombers, 70 Japanese bombers and 40 fighters destroyed on ground. 50 ships sunk in docks and river. I can't get this bit. Drunks released from Jap guardroom. I don't get that bit. Drunks released from Jap guardroom. Unless they've been drinking alcohol they made up themselves, I don't know. Air raid alarm.
Sounds like it.
Yeah. The 15th, 4 POWs returned from Jap hospital. 16th, 200 men left for Fumi. Is that Fumi? F-U-M-I. I take it. I'll pronounce it Fumi. Aerodrome camp. 2 Dutchmen, Fugsman and Von D. Spot, beaten up on dock working party for alleged theft of tobacco. Air raid alarm, 1340 to 1430 hours. Japanese officer, and he's put in brackets Donald Duck, arrived at camp today. 21st, 75 men and 1 doctor to Fumi. 22nd, 75 men to Fumi. 23rd, 52 men to Fumi, 1 ERT. Now the ERTs were the ones who were in Saigon before they arrived, the ones who were there in 42. They called them ERTs. They were confined to Jap guardroom for theft of mess tins. Air raid alarm, 11 o'clock to 1440. Major Seekins, Captain Spooner, and 218 English POWs ex-Singapore arrived in camp. 26th, air raid alarm, the times 8:40 to 1950. 27th, air raid, 35 hours, bombs fell before POWs left camp. Lieutenant Cromwell beaten up. 28th, air raid, 1745 to 8:20. and then you get on to February. And something for my interest was my dad went to Saigon on the 2nd of the 2nd, 45. They were taken from Nonplussed down to Singapore, and then they went by boat to Saigon. And one interest in the book is 421 ORs arrive at 22 hours. Further 2,000 POWs reported billeted in docks. So my dad was actually billeted in the docks. That I didn't know that, so that was good. Anyway, so I thought I'd just add that because we're supposed to be adding things about January, aren't we? This is what Barbara wanted. So we had VJ Day, and we built up to VJ Day. So that was my contribution. I am sorry. I honestly thought I set it for 7 because everyone said 7.
It's 20
so I thought I set it for 7.
No, definitely, Ronnie. I checked the email, Ronnie. It definitely says 7:30.
Yeah. Anyway, so you're hearing anyway.
Anyway, we're here.
Yeah. Anyone else got anything you want to say about January?
I don't know.
No?
Okay.
My
I'm just having a quick look through.
My work at Ubon starts in February.
Ah,
So,
yeah.
starts, but actually,
There's certainly, yeah.
Just off
Go on,
the cuff,
Ray.
just off the cuff, there was still clearing up in Ubon in January 1946. The operation as such had finished in November, and the SOE, Major Smiley, had returned to Bangkok and then eventually went home to the UK. But there was another British officer called Major Headley, John Headley, who previously had been in Burma with the SOE. He was injured. He came out for hospital treatment, and when he was fit to go back in, the war was coming to an end virtually. So he transferred to the what was it called, the British Commission or something like that, which took over the repatriation of the prisoners of war based in Bangkok, and they sent him out to Ubon. They sent him out to Ubon in late October, and he assisted Major Smiley to. By this time, the prisoners had gone from Ubon by the end of September, but the Japanese were surrendering into Ubon. It was 10,000 of them in the end, and they had to concentrate somewhere. So it was Major Headley's job to find accommodation for them. Well, they built a camp, and they had to be fed. So, supplies of food had to be brought in, and then they had to be disarmed, all of that sort of stuff. And that carried on right through till the end of January, when things were finally wrapped up and everybody could go home. But what I've realised with doing things on Ubon is the effect that these camps had on the local communities and population. There was thousands of men in many of the camps, and it must have had some kind of effect on the towns and villages around. It certainly did in Ubon. It cost them a lot of money because the governor provided food and entertainment and whatnot for quite a while. But the Thai people, I can account for Ubon, not so much elsewhere, but they were happy. They were very generous and accommodating to the prisoners, even though they were giving a lot of their own possessions and money, especially from the local government, towards them. So, it's something that we should think about as well. I think in terms of the prisoners.
How did the Japanese get home then, Ray? Do we know?
Yeah, they were gradually sent in, certainly from Ubon. They were sent in batches back to Bangkok, where they were, I guess, sorted, whatever the word is, and put on boats to go back to Japan from Bangkok.
Did we ship them back, or did the Japanese come with boats and get them back?
I'm not 100% certain on that.
No. We never look at that. We always tend to look at the British or the British or Allied side. We don't tend to look at them, do we?
Yeah.
Certainly from some of the places that I've read about, it was Japanese boats came and picked them up, but whether that applied in Bangkok, I don't know.
Well, I think if it was any Allied shipping from Bangkok, it would be Australian, because the British were on the sort of more west, weren't they, on the Rangoon, India side of things. I do know that there was a ship, the name just escapes me, but a repatriation ship from the Australians went from Bangkok. And there must have been more than one, just like our repatriation boats.
So the Japanese must have organised to get, like we organised ours to get our boys back. They must have had the same type of thing, I suppose. So they must have set up who's going to go on what boat, exactly the same as they did in Rangoon.
Yeah. They must have done, but I think the priority was for the Allied POWs, because there was, like, in Bangkok, the main concentration area for the British was at Don Muang Airport. The Americans were down in Bangkok in the go-downs. There was a lot less Americans.
So from Bangkok, were they flown to Rangoon?
Yeah.
Yeah, because my dad went from Saigon to Bangkok, and as refueling from Saigon, and then on to Rangoon.
Yeah. They were all flown Dakotas mainly, I think.
Yeah.
The Dakotas could only get about 30 men at a time. So it was pretty much full on, ferrying back and forth.
Looking at the figures around Saigon, to get them to Rangoon, and they were all flown out. Of course, Barbara's dad was in Saigon from 42, and they had, I think there was about 2,000 of them. My dad, looking at these figures, were about 2,000 of them, and then you've got the Kumis with the British Sumatra Battalion. They had about 1,000, I think. I think it was about 1,000. So there's a hell of a lot to fly out, and as you said, they only got about 30 on per trip. So that's a hell of a big job, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, the flying time from Bangkok to Rangoon was about 2 hours. So, a plane could turn around, probably do 2 or 3 trips a day, subject to maintenance and refueling and whatnot. But there were some accidents, and 1 or 2 planes were lost.
Dad said that the first one from Saigon to supposed to have gone to Rangoon actually crashed, and that crash taken off from Bangkok. They stopped to refuel, and as they took off, the locals said there was a loud explosion as it took off, and they don't know if it hit a sandbank or what it hit, but they were all killed on board. And to go right the way through the war and then, get killed after liberation. But as Dad said, they were the sick. They were the ones that needed it desperately, so that was the first plane out. I think I've told you before, one of them was a Yarmouth boy, and I used to go in his brother's bookshop, and his brother just let slip that I used to go in there and buy second-hand books because that was the cheapest way to do it because I was only an apprentice at the time. And so I used to go and buy books, and he knew what books I bought because they were all Far East. And so he just said to me that his brother died out there, and Dad actually knew his brother, and he actually died on that first one out. So he was liberated and then got killed. Horrible. Have anyone else have Tim got anything?
Not for January, I don't think. The only thing I would say about January is that, which people sometimes forget, is that those who were in Japan for 43, 44 and 45 practically freezing to death. Everyone thinks about, Far East, it's red hot, but, their problem was the cold.
Yeah.
No heating.
Lack of food, cold, lack of clothing. Yeah. But, no, yeah. I mean, we know a lot about Singapore in January because we the causeway was blown 29th of January. So, causeway was blown and the Japanese were putting a siege on Singapore from that day on. So that was the last day of January. The beginning of January is really the fallback in front of the Japs towards Singapore. So did any of you try what I suggested? If you do put the date in on...
Oh, I know. It's brilliant, Roddy. I'd have to stay up all night to read that lot.
Yeah, that worked out quite well. And
it did.
And
pages
I mean,
of stuff come up.
There's loads of it because it's taken it from all the sites I've done, and it just takes that date out. So what we ought to do really is do the same for February, so you can see what happened in February. The horrible thing, I mean, you can't go through all the deaths because it does actually name all the dead in January and February, whatever. So you can't name them all because there's so many, particularly at the beginning. But February, of course, we've got the Suk Ching, and you've got the. That's my dog keeps trying to get on my lap. Come on. No. He's been out, so he keeps coming on my lap. He's our puppy. Let me just get him. No. Oh, he's gone running off. So anyway, so you've got in February there is quite a bit to talk about because you've then got the camp sorting out and so there's loads there. January is a bit of an awkward month, really, isn't it?
Are we talking about any January?
Yes, any January, right the way through.
Yeah.
So January 42, 43, 44 and 45 and 46 if you want to include 46.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, you had a lot of the ill. I had one today. Got in touch, asked me to add some more to the Roll of Honour for her dad, or not her dad, her granddad. And he didn't get home till 6 months after liberation. She knew he went to Canada and he died soon after, so that must have been hospitalised. So he was held up in Canada. So they must have had hospitals in Canada accepting the POWs.
I've got some stuff for January.
Oh, go on then, Sophie.
Yeah. So, firstly, I'd like to pick up on the point Ray made earlier about the local people up at Ubon. And my older brother John, who's 24 years old, he was born in December 1947. he did one of the things he did actually say that he remembered, because obviously he's that much older than me, that he's have different memories than me of our dad. And he said that the up at Ubon, the local did supply food to the prison. Actually, one of the things that my dad liked to get from them, even though they must have been risking stuff to, a lot to give it to them, was like sort of Thai curries and stuff. So after, when he came back, he always had quite a liking for curries that was born out of the kindness of them, and that's what he must have seen to represent. Obviously food was scarce and everything, so he always had a fondness for those curries, which I can't recall. But it's just another little in the face of a lot of adversity, how incredibly kind and generous, and they probably risked a lot to help people, and even though they didn't have much, they gave what they could to the prisoners, which is nice to think that people would with so little would have been would have still gone all out to help those that they saw less fortunate themselves at the time, as much as they could. And it's nice to see. Anyway,
Dad said that
the other
times. Thing, go on then. Do you want me to talk?
The other thing is that
go on then.
Yeah, my dad was captured. He wasn't. Well, he might have been in Singapore at one stage, but he went up north and was captured at somewhere called Kuala Lumpur on the 17th of January 1942.
Sorry,
so he went.
Can you say that again?
Yeah, he was captured on the 17th of January 1942 at somewhere called Kuala Lumpur Road, Malaya. So and then he was taken then to Taiping jail until June of that year, so June 1942, and then from July 1942 to October 1942, he was at Kuala Lumpur jail, and he went to Nong Pladuk. So I'd like to try and find out a bit more about those two jails, Taiping and Kuala Lumpur, because he wasn't down in Singapore, and so his experience must have been rather different again.
Most of them that are in Taiping, they did end up in Kuala Lumpur. There's quite a bit on Kuala Lumpur.
I Googled both of them and tried to bring up, there didn't seem to be an awful lot. So if anybody has anything about those, and pictures and information stuff, I'd be really interested.
At Kuala Lumpur, it's probably Pudu jail. Pudu.
Okay.
Pudu.
Is that Pudu?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's helpful. So I can.
It was
I didn't know that.
a fairly infamous jail, and if you recall, about a year ago, I did a trip from Singapore up to Ubon with a gentleman called David Sartin, and his father John Sartin, was in the Special Services, Special Operations Executive, and he was captured at Kuala Kubu, which is a village about 40 or 50 miles north of Kuala Lumpur, and he was taken to Pudu jail with several other agents from the SOE, and a lot of the SOE guys decided to escape, which they did, but they were recaptured, and when they returned to Pudu, they were executed, and their bodies have never been found. But luckily for John Sartin, for some reason he didn't go on the escape, and he survived the war, and he ended up at Ubon as well. And I'm pretty certain he transferred from Pudu to Nonpluduc in October 1942. So he could have been with you in the same group as your father.
They might have known each other.
Yeah, your dad went to Overland. There's only 2 trains went from Kuala Lumpur direct to Nonpluduc, and he was on the 14th of the 10th. He actually, that was October, Ray. October the 14th. There was 2 trains that went from Kuala Lumpur to Nonpluduc, and then we had this before. Some days later, they sent some from Kuala Lumpur to Singapore, who were later then transferred up to Nonpluduc. So they went from Kuala Lumpur through Malaya to Singapore, and then they sent them back up to Thailand, which was a bit strange. I find that a bit strange. I mean, why didn't they keep them at Kuala Lumpur and then send them up from there? I just don't get that. But there were only 2 trains, Sophie, that went direct from Kuala Lumpur to Nonpluduc.
So he
and
must
your
have
dad
been
was on the 14th. He was on the 14th. I found that out for you, didn't I? Because I've got it up here.
Actually, there was a question about the dates. That my oldest sister, she said, I've got 2 half sisters, my mum's daughters. So my dad wasn't their father, but he essentially brought them up all their life. And one of the things that she said when I showed her the liberation questionnaire, she said, in the knowledge of what was happening to them, and I'm given her all the information and stuff, but she said she found it hard to believe how somebody could be that detailed about the dates when they were going through all that. She said, were they counting like what was the method of knowing when, did they track the dates? Was it sort of I think she said, did they mark off like 5-bar gates or something like that? I don't know, but she said, how did you know he went on that date? She said, if that was me, I wouldn't know. And I just thought, that's a really good question, isn't it? I don't know. How did they know?
I had one during the week, and he was in the RAF in Java. The one during the week I did in the Roll of Honour. He was in the RAF at Java, and he went from one camp to Sayabaya. Have I got it right?
Surabaya.
You know what I mean. He went there to be transferred to Haruku, but the dates he stated were so-and-so 42 to so-and-so 42. And of course, I think he's definitely got the date, the year wrong, because that should have been June 43. He was transferred to Haruku, and he put June 42. So they had a gap between him being at the one camp to Surabaya, and he didn't even put that in his questionnaire, but I found that in the Q files. But he had a gap, and then from there he went to Haruku, and he was supposed to left, according to him, 43 June. No, 43. They went there. I think they went there on the 4th April, and then in June he left Haruku. Well, nobody left Haruku then. The sick left September, but the following year they left June, so that was 44. So he got the years wrong. Instead of putting 42.
What was his name, Rob? What was the name of the chap you were looking at?
I've done it all now. I can't think of it.
No, it's just that someone came up with exactly the same thing on another website, and I pointed in the direction of your your link, so I don't know whether he's now
That
got
might
hold
be
of
the
you.
same. Yeah, that might be the same
I
one.
just wonder what the chap's name was. I can't
Let
remember.
let me just find it. I just can't think at the moment who it was. Just a minute. I'll look at my blog because that's the easiest thing.
Because I also pointed at is it the Maros Maru site you've got?
Yeah, that is Maurice Maru, but he didn't come
Because
back on
that's
that.
how I reckoned
Because
it.
some of them didn't go to Ambon. They went straight from Harugu back to Java, and he was one of them. Right, I think this is the one. John Brennand.
Yeah, that's right. Because his
Yeah,
name's spelt wrong. It's
yeah,
spelt
his
Brandon
name's
or
spelt
something.
wrong. BRE.
Yeah.
Uh,
Oh, well, there you
and
are.
that's Brennand, and most of them spell it
Yeah,
BRA. So most of the
that's
files come up
right.
with
Yeah,
BRA. But
it is.
on
It is the
his
same one I was looking at.
yeah on his liberation form, he
That's
left.
right. It,
He left the camp he was at when he was captured. He left that on. Well, he was there. 1942, the 4th. That's when he went there, and he was supposed to have stayed there till June 42. Well,
yeah, and he meant
they were
43.
shipped. Yeah, they were shipped out the year later, 43. So he'd got the dates wrong. So, as you were saying, Sophie, they didn't quite get the dates all correct, because I've had this come up before when they put the
No.
wrong year. They do put the wrong year. They were suffering when they were released. After liberation, they were suffering, and a lot of them were. I mean, they weren't quite with it. And of course, when they filled up the liberation forms, they did get some of it quite wrong. Some of them you get the months wrong, but some, the worst ones, are when you get the year wrong and you have to try and sort it out. But anyway, I did put a page on for him, Tim, so he has got a page.
Right, I'll have a look at that.
Yeah, he has got a page in Roll. That's quite detailed. I found quite a bit out for him. But
he's whoever it is, I can't remember if it's the son or what. It's obviously asking around the world then for information.
Yeah, Sophie. No, Stephen Lenny. Because I always put the name who get in touch with me. So it was his name who was asked me about it was Stephen Lenny. Stephen Lenny.
What was it? His grandfather or something, was it then?
I can't remember now. I didn't put it down there. Sometimes I do put after the name what relation they were, but that was definitely granddad or great granddad. It was one of the two.
God, it's getting worse.
But if you haven't read Prisoner Doctor and you want to find something out about the Maurice Maru or Harugu, it's a brilliant book. He was there. He was the doctor in there's two doctors for the British, and Harugu is horrendous. I mean, when they got there, they got to Harugu, and the locals were supposed to have built the huts, and they hadn't finished the roofs. So when they got to Harugu, it's torrential rain, and they'd built the huts on a slope. The latrines were at the top of the slope. And the workmen who built the huts, the locals, had been using the latrines. So the rain had overflowed them and they were flowing down into the huts. And they hadn't put any benches in the huts. So they had to sleep on the floor. And of course, they had all the muck and everything coming from the latrines into the huts. And dysentery quickly as an epidemic. And the Japs wouldn't put it down to the latrines. They said it was the flies. And so they got the same old thing. Every day, each POW had to catch 100 flies. That's ridiculous, really. But Harugu was horrendous. I mean, 300 odd died in 2 months. bacterial dysentery. Have I got it right? Bacterial dysentery. Yeah, it's and then of course from there they went to Ambon, which wasn't so bad in that respect. But then the ship Maru, we all know about that. 300 odd British died, and 70, I think it was 72 Dutch. So in the end, there's 372 died. When I first looked at that, I thought, where was it sunk? But then after looking into it, you realise that was the conditions on board that killed them. They weren't sunk at all. They died, and that's a bit horrible when you read his book. I mean, that's good because he's got all the detail. But when they got to Macassar, have I said it right? Macassar?
Yeah, it's Macassar, yes.
Yeah. When they got to Macassar, they spent 5 days repairing the ship, Maru, and they were still dying on board, and they buried them at sea in the harbour. So they had bodies floating about in the harbour. Horrendous. Really horrendous.
It's 2030.
That wasn't a very nice one to really look into, but the book is absolutely brilliant. He explains everything, and he does give you a warning, really. He says, this next bit isn't the nicest bit to read, and because he was a doctor and he was there, it's good to read what he's going on about, because he's looking at the illnesses other than the workforce, what they did in the workforce. He's looking at what he had to cope with, which was quite horrendous. Anyway, have we got anything else to say? Because I've got to go and look after Gillian. Gillian's home, by the way. Yeah, she's home. Yeah. She was in 4 days, but the operation should have took an hour and 3/4, 2 hours at the most. She was in there for 3 hours because they had complications. But because they're short on beds, they get them out as quick as possible. So I'll tell you, Sunday and Monday, I just didn't know where I was. At the hospital, they're doing 12.5 hours shifts. And I tell you, I was doing 24 hours. And I feel tired now. I absolutely, of course, I mean, you're doing it for Gillian. So, I mean, you're doing it for someone you love, so that's different. But God, I honestly, I absolutely knackered. Really. I feel it now. So tiring, because even when we go to bed, she can't rest because the hip, she turns over and she got pain, so she has to turn over again. And then she gets up and have a walk around. And of course, you're waking up all the time and going and getting a cup of tea to, oh dear. But no, last night she was a lot better, and she did actually make our dinner today, sitting on the seat. She did actually do a casserole, so she's getting back to normal. So yeah, I'm chuffed with her. Hopefully now, she's on the mend. Anyway, have we finished? I am honestly sorry. I thought that was 7. Barbara thought that was 6:30. I was hoping Barbara was going to be here because her dad was in Saigon, so we could have had a bit about what her dad went through in Saigon. We try and do something different, don't we? Well, Saigon is something we haven't touched on.
Just one addition very quickly. On the 25th of January, Thailand declared war on Great Britain, and Great Britain accepted the declaration. So yeah, that's coming up in 3 days.
Yeah, I did start making some notes, Ray, and Thailand and Indochina came into it, and I can't remember what it was about. Let me just try and find it. I'm trying to do this and look after Gillian at the same time, which is a bit, you lose where you are. Let me just have a look. I think I put it on the VJ day. VJ day. Far East. Yeah, I got the notes here. I'll read out what I wrote. I started writing notes down for January 41. The 11th, the Malayan capital Kuala Lumpur falls to the invading Japanese, the 5th Division. 14th, this is something I didn't know. The 14th, the first use of the V for Victory by Victor de Lavelli on BBC's Belgium service Radio Belgique. I didn't know that. Did you?
No.
No? That was the first use of the V sign, the V for Victory.
Does it mean that, or it just doesn't mean the start of the BBC News V sign, does it? You know, the BBC News used to go.
No, that said that was the first use of V for Victory. He did it actually. He said on the radio that was the V for Victory. I didn't know that was the 14th of January 1941. So Churchill didn't start it. Anyway, the 15th, Japanese forces invade Burma, beginning their assault on Victoria Point. 19th of January, Japanese covered about 230 miles and reached Tavoy. 31st, Malaya fell to Japanese when the last fighting troops crossed the causeway, joining Malaya to Singapore. The 31st, Singapore under siege. The 31st, this is it, right? The 31st of January, the Japanese government arranged a truce to end fighting between Thai and Vichy French forces in Indochina. The Thai government sought to regain territory lost to the French during their colonization of Indochina. Under the terms of truce, the Japanese confirmed their military occupation of French Indochina and gained access to Indochina's rice, rubber, coal and minerals.
Yeah, that I think would be 1941. Not 42.
31st.
Yeah.
Have I got? Oh, no, was it 41? I might have made a mistake there because I've got it as 42. Anyway.
Well, very, very quickly, what happened was the Japanese were, I keep using the word seducing the Thai to become allies with them. They were piling in all sorts of aid and military, trade, arts, education, and so on. And at the time, there was some peace treaties signed between the French and the British, which were called non-aggression treaties. And when the French signed theirs, the day after they signed, the Germans invaded or captured France. France surrendered to the Germans, and the Vichy government was formed in France. Hitler wasn't too fussed about what was going on abroad at that time, so he gave the responsibility of looking after the French interests overseas to the Vichy government, which included Indochina. And then the Thai wanted back some of the land that the French had sort of grabbed off them, or bits of border between Thailand and what is now Laos, mainly on the River Mekong. And there was quite a few battles that went on. It was a bit of a war, but war wasn't actually declared. It ended when the French fought the Thai Navy at Koh Samui, and the Thai Navy was defeated, and at that point, an end to fighting had to be the fighting had to be brought to a close. The Americans and the British didn't want to know anything about it, so the Japanese, seizing an opportunity, intermeddled a little bit and got the two sides together. But they favoured Thailand because the French were very weak. And so Thailand got this land back, at the sort of annoyance of the French. But the French couldn't do anything about it because they were too weak. Meanwhile, the Japanese in the north of what was then Indochina, near Hanoi, an area which is called Tonkin, the Japanese saw an opportunity there to come into Indochina, and to cut a long story short, they sort of funneled in en masse, and that's how they came to occupy French Indochina. They travelled as far south as they covered the whole of French Indochina, what is now Vietnam and Cambodia and Laos. In that 12 months, from December 41 up to 42, the end of 42, the Japanese built airstrips, particularly in the south, facing the Thai coast across the Gulf of Thailand. And they made their base in Saigon, which is where, what's his name, Mansanabu made his invasion plans. And from October 1941, the plan was put into action, and in December they went over to Thailand, and the rest is kind of what we know about.
Yeah, because that's where most of the planes came over to Malaya and Singapore, isn't it?
Yeah.
From French Indochina.
There is. I've got the name of the place somewhere. Might take me a minute to find it, but they did. That Gulf of Thailand has got Bangkok at the top, and then on the western side you've got the Thai coast, and on the eastern side you've got Cambodia and Vietnam. Well, down at the bottom of Vietnam on the coast there's an island. I can't just remember the name of it, but they built an airstrip there, and that's where they started to send reconnaissance flights over Thailand to weigh up the best points to invade. Although it wasn't an invasion.
When you look at it though, Ray, they were way ahead of plans that we didn't really put together, did we?
Yeah.
I mean, they got their airstrips going in French Indochina, knowing what they could do from there. Well, we didn't really put two and two together and get it, did we?
No.
We didn't just understand what they were on.
That's right.
We thought we were so powerful we could just get away with it. We were, they wouldn't dare it. They wouldn't dare attack us,
Yeah.
But no, there's little bits I started to put together. But when we went to France, we did used to go to France quite a bit when my girls were very small, because they liked south of France. And we went to Lourdes, Lourdes. I like going to see what religions people believe in. So we went to Lourdes to see what was there. And, you have people being wheeled up on stretchers, with drips and everything to go and be blessed. That's really strange. They really are wheeling them in, and you think, where the hell have they come from? But they're bringing them out of trucks and everything, just to be blessed. Anyway, we were there, we saw all this going on, and one thing that got me, and I'll always remember it, is this family. There's this really big trestle, and it is huge. It really is a huge trestle, about 20 yards long, and people are lighting candles and putting on the trestle, and for blessings and everything. They're putting them on, they're lighting a family for there, putting them on, and it was absolutely jam-packed, the candles burning. And this family come up with their candles, and the father just went, stoom, knocked them all on the floor and put their candles in place. I thought, well, that isn't religion.
Very nice.
You just knocked them all on the floor. I thought, anyway, we left there, and about 10 miles going back up the west side of France, we saw this sign, concentration camp. And so I said to Gillian, we'll stop, we'll stop. And so we stopped and walked in. That was all closed up. That was all completely fenced off. But I tell you, there weren't no birds singing at all. That was completely quiet. That's very, very strange, eerie. But there was no birds singing whatsoever. That was so quiet. But that's the only one we've ever seen, but that's not a nice thing to see. But you couldn't see anything what happened. It's just closed off, and you can imagine what happened because, as I said, no birds singing whatsoever. Anyway, sorry I was late for the meeting. I do apologise. Do we think they go better on a Saturday and a Sunday?
A bit difficult to tell, isn't it? Because
It is, yeah. It is difficult to tell. I mean, Keith got in touch today.
But,
You'd
my
prefer
preference
the
would be the
weekday?
weeknight. Yeah, because
Yeah.
it's easier to fit in and leaves the
Shall we
weekend
try,
free.
shall
I
we
guess.
try it for another
try
couple
one
of
more.
months?
Yeah,
Yeah,
try it one more
yeah.
time. And,
Yeah, we'll try it again and see if we can get some more. I think Barbara would have
get
been
some
here.
feedback. Yeah,
Barbara would have been here, so that would have made another one.
I can do a bit earlier if needs be. It's not.
Can we say 7? Can we say
Yeah, that's
7
fine.
in future? I'll do it for 7. And I
Yeah.
do apologise. I thought I'd done it for 7, but I honestly have had so much on my plate.
No,
It's,
don't worry.
I honestly
You got
do
here in the
apologise.
end.
Understandable.
We got
So
here.
You got here in the end.
got here in the end.
Yeah, and we did have quite
Yeah,
a
it's not-
quite a nice chat, didn't we? So yeah. So next time that will be February. So there's quite a few things we can add for February, isn't we? Because then we've got the big, beginning of POWs. You've got Java.
I thought you were talking about the meeting rather than the agenda.
No, I'm talking about what we can talk about.
Agenda now.
So I think we'll just say February's. Any February during the from 42 to 40. We'll say 45 in this case because keep it because VJ Day goes by 45, of course. So if we keep it from 42 to 45, would that be okay? So we'll say February, anything that happened in February throughout that period. Okay? And as you say, Tim, to jog memories, if you just put February 1942 and then change it to 43 and so on, you'll get it come up on that
It is. It's
search.
absolutely brilliant. I've never tried it before, and I
That
hadn't
does-
realised
that's
you'd written
quite-
so much.
Well, yeah, but if you just put, I've been writing since 1990. It's a long time to write things, but now you see, I do tend to write a lot now, mainly since Gillian's been ill, because I come in here and write, so we can't do anything else. So that was it. I mean, now this year might be a bit different because we can get down the caravan and have a bit of a break. It'd be good to see her walk, to be honest. I'll just stop the record